Greetings and welcome to your next week in business ethics. This week, the purpose of the chapter is basically to highlight the ethical issues that relate to strategic planning and corporate culture. The material that's presented in the chapter should give you a better understanding of the critical role of strategic planning and corporate culture uh, in the formulation and implementation of effective ethics programs. It should become a little clearer to you that ethical decision making should be, although it's not always, integrated in every step that you make in the decision making process. And in saying that, firms should view all decision making as being equal to ethical decision making. So every decision that they should make ethically. Uh, some of the issues that will be talked about in this lecture include the benefits of ethics in the decision-making process and the costs of having an unethical corporate culture. Your chapter also addresses, if I remember correctly, some relevant issues such as how a firm can recover from ethical crisis uh, or disaster, and how changes in the corporate culture may be necessary in order to implement uh, a more effective ethics program for the firm. Uh, Before we talk about ethics and strategic planning, you need to know about uh, the interconnectedness between ethics and strategic planning. Uh, so we could look at the ethical SWOT analysis. And the ethical SWOT analysis allows the decision maker to visualize the pros and the cons of a decision that could have ethical implications. What does SWOT stand for? Well, SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Strengths are the internal strong characteristics within the firm that can be used to help implement the ethical decision. A few examples are strong corporate reputation, having that good face out there for everybody to see, and never do anything that anyone could see or construe as being unethical or illegal. That positive image. Corporate ethical philosophy. Uh, uh, the results of previous ethical decisions. Having a formal code of ethics. Uh, Having an ethics training program, an effective one. You might even have an ethics officer. Excuse me. Uh, Using a triple line evaluation of performance, having a strong financial performance, which allows continued ethics-based investments. And the weaknesses, well, these are internal weak characteristics within the firm that need to be resolved. Uh, Giving you a few examples of this, we have a negative corporate reputation and image, no ethical vision for top level managers, have zero or minimal ethics based training for the firm's employees. Uh, or the firm could be ignoring the needs and expectations of at least some of the stakeholders and focusing solely on the financial goal. No formal code of ethics, no formal training program, no ethics officer, no ethics evaluation process. So basically totally the opposite of what strong is. Here's the weak. Opportunities. These are the future courses of action that a company can take to enhance their ethical standing. Some of the examples of these opportunities could be or include resolve the ethical weaknesses that are listed in the ethical SWOT, benchmark ethical performance against the industry and the ethical trendsetter, give your employees incentives to suggest improvements in their current ethics programs, give them incentives to identify ethical violations, use state-of-the-art technology to help facilitate monitoring and ethical control procedures of the employees. Establish liaisons with government agencies that monitor the firm's industry. You could establish a membership in a voluntary industry-based organization that supports strong ethical standards. And, review how both domestic and international competitors address the same ethical issues. Next, we move to threats. Well, threats are external factors that can impact the ethical standards of a firm, such as a change in government regulation, change in a competitor's focus, more competitors coming onto the scene, a downturn in the economy of the countries in which the firm competes, changes in technology that the firm fails to adapt or adopt, changes in customers' perceptions, the image of the firm, even a change in the other stakeholders' perceptions of the image of the firm, or a change in the demands and expectations of the stakeholders. Because, those demands could change constantly. Excuse me. Let's talk a little bit about a manager's ability to develop and trust commitment and effort. First thing I want you to do is ask yourself, what is duty? Well, duty is working with those moral problems and creating a trust, right? We use moral reasoning and commitment, integrity, moral courage, and effort. Let's talk about the model of trust, figure 8-2 on 144. Are these three constructs, do they need to be presented simultaneously to the firm's employees, or should they be sequential in nature? Think about that. We could argue that management could have an opportunity to establish these three attributes in sequence. First would be trust, because without this foundation, the rest of the model could collapse from the employee's perspective. After trust is established, the goal of the manager is to get the buy-in by the employees via commitment. The employees must be active and not passive as it relates to the ethical vision of the company. A lot of times, employees are afraid because they're afraid to lose their job if they say anything or if they suggest anything that's out of, out of line. After trust and commitment has been established, the subsequent effort of the employees can be capitalized on by the firm. Firms has established the foundation of trust and commitment so that the employees want to work in establishing the ethical vision of the firm. And that's the whole idea. You want to have employees that want to work in building the establishment, in the establishment's ethical vision, and all around. Well, what's the role of power and influence in ethical decisions? Well, there's an old saying, with great power comes great responsibility. That old saying just happens to be from a comic book character. It's a quote from Spider-Man, and it allows us to understand that ethics can take place even in a make-believe world of Peter Parker or Spider-Man and his Uncle Ben. This enforces the idea that ethics impact not only the decisions they make as employees, but also as citizens of the world. Excuse me. The next thing we'll talk about is how to control power and influence. Well, the challenge of trying to control power and influence is to realize that the level of power and influence you could have over employees. It doesn't matter whether the power is legitimate or implied. Managers must understand that what they say and how they act can greatly influence the behavior of his or her subordinates. Now, from an ethical perspective, power and influence can be used to ensure the employees are committed to the ethical philosophy of the firm. The responsibility of managers is the next thing we'll touch upon. The foundation of the role managers should play in decision-making process was established by Chester Bernard in his book, The Functions of the Executive. Now, in this book, Bernard argues that managers have a moral responsibility for every decision they make. Therefore, he assigns not only responsibility, but also accountability to managers for their actions. If you want to look at the table 8-1 on 147, it highlights the importance of management leadership and employee commitment in the ethical strategic planning process. And you can glean from that Dollar General refers to not only the commitment of rights of the employees, but also realizes the value of humor in the workplace. And from an ethical perspective, management tools such as humor are invaluable in relying on the ethical beliefs of the firm. If there's humor in the workplace, there's a probability of a more relaxed atmosphere. If there's a more relaxed atmosphere, employees are more willing to protect the relaxed atmosphere. They want it to stay comfortable and relaxed. They don't want an intense workplace. And if they're willing to protect that atmosphere, they'll stop any actions that can threaten their atmosphere that they work in, such as an unethical behavior by another employee. They'll stop it. They'll talk to the employee, and if that doesn't work, they'll take it to the top. They want to maintain that comfortable working environment. Okay, how do we address ethical decision making from the global perspective? If you look at figure 8.3, it highlights the different ethical philosophies that can be observed globally. It's very important for a manager to understand that different countries have different cultures, which may lead to different ethical philosophies. As a result, it is a critical error to assume that everyone in the world acts the same and agrees to the same ethical philosophies. In the U.S., the ethical philosophy would be presented, or excuse me, would represent the majority of people, focusing on serving self-interest from an ethical perspective. Therefore, ethical egoism would almost closely match this belief pattern. Now, in other countries, like in the Pacific Rim, would probably more coincide with a group or a utilitarianism approach. So when a global corporation designs their ethical philosophy and training program, they've got to take into consideration these cultural differences. Ethical training programs may be changed and altered depending on the country in which the ethical training takes place. And the ethical ideologies don't just stem from the people themselves and the country. It stems from a lot of times from religious views and ideologies. Let's look at ethical leadership. If you look on page 151, it's an ethical leadership, a link between strategic planning and corporate culture. In order for managers to be proactive in the role as ethical leaders, they need to first have the traits of a moral person. It's not going to work if they're not a moral person in the first place. They have to have those traits of a moral person. And as a result, integrity, honesty, trustworthiness, these are the cornerstones of foundation of ethical leadership. It's these traits that drive the behavior and those decision-making processes of the manager. Once the core has been established, the ethical behaviors and decision-making will logically follow. And without the moral traits, the manager couldn't become an effective moral manager. Since the role of a moral manager is to be a role model and to help in the decisions pertaining to rewards and punishment, and to communicate the ethical values of the firms, the grounding of these actions also start with the underlying traits of a moral person. Excuse me. You can have leaders who are hypocritical leaders. Let's ethical to hypocritical leader. In order for this shift to take place, the manager starts to ignore his or her ethical duties and responsibilities as manager. As a result, what's told to his or her subordinates is no longer consistent with his or her actions. So, in other words, if I say we are a non-smoking office, and yet I continue to smoke at the office, I'm a hypocrite. So I've become a hypocritical leader. Someone like an inconsistent leader to an unethical one. The manager who initially had the traits of a strong moral person has lost those traits. Uh, if the manager does not place the moral traits in high regard, this is where the change starts. And it may be a case since the inconsistent managers are not transferring the value of those traits to his or her supervisors. And as a result, since they're not being transferred, they may no longer be considered of value to the manager, which would lead him or her to becoming unethical. Uh, you see all of these differences of management and how things could fall. So how can managers change a corporate culture? Well, from an ethical perspective, the challenge of changing the corporate culture occurs when there's been an ethical crisis and a failure or a failure. If the firm has a strong positive ethical supportive culture, the culture doesn't need to be changed. However, if an ethics scandal hits the firm's corporate culture has to change. It must change. And for some firms, for instance, look at Enron, the financial collapse, which was included with the ethical collapse, was too great to recover from. Excuse me. For other firms such as WorldCom, the change in culture also includes the change in the name of the company. By changing its name from WorldCom to MCI, top-level managers have given a signal to the marketplace that not only has the company culture changed, but so is the company. Whichever option the firm selects in order to change the culture of the firm, the trust and commitment of the employees must take place before the change can be executed. It's critical. Their trust and commitment is critical before the managers can expect an effort, managerial effort. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. My tongue's getting tied there. So what I'm trying to say is employee trust and commitment is critical before managers can expect an effort by the employees. So employees must be involved in the culture change. They must have input in what changes will take place, and they must agree to their new responsibilities based on the execution of the culture changes. It's only after all these steps have been taken that the firm can expect significant change in the culture to support new ethical focus. Support a new ethical focus. Evaluation of corporate culture. Now, from an ethical perspective, there's a very simple way to evaluate the firm's corporate culture. The managers of the firms must go through a checklist that's familiar to the one presented by on page 156 by Deloitte and Touche. Part of the ethics training focus should include an evaluation of the ethical knowledge of the employees. Employees should be well versed in what the ethical philosophy of the firm is, as well as what the responsibilities are to ensure the ethical integrity of the firm is maintained. And managers must remember that code of ethics, ethics training, ethics learning, these are continuous events that evolve over time. It's not just a one-time thing, it's an evolution. And as a result of the code of ethics is a living document that can change as the view of society changes. Economic and social conditions around the world can impact the content of the presentations of ethics from a training perspective. all employees need to be involved in the learning process as it relates to corporate ethics. I hope this has given you a good view into what we're studying this week. If you have any questions, again, you have my email address, you have my cell number, you can text me, you can email me. I will get back with you as soon as possible. If there are any difficulties, please let me know. If I can't help, I will find the way to help. Have a good week. Enjoy your studies. Thank you.